Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime. I'm your host, as always, Professor Prime, and today we're going to talk about math and the Pokemon trading card game, aka the TCG. And we're going to talk about how to play it as far as the basics are concerned. We're going to talk about the tournaments, we're going to talk about the video games, we're going to talk about collecting the cards themselves and the crazy drama and insanity that has been taking place in this last year as far as the cards are concerned and collecting them. And if you're wondering, it's all about high price nonsense and some nostalgia. It's in there. But we'll get to that when we get to it if you didn't know. And if you did and you're looking forward to it, yeah, it's going to happen. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about how math is using all those things. And we're also going to talk about my experiences growing up with the Poke card. Okay. um, the Pokemon trading card game. So yeah, let's get into it. So I grew up on Pokemon, right? Like I grew up in the thick of Pokemania. I was just the right age. I was in middle school when it started over here in the States, though it had been out a bit in Japan before that. I didn't know that at the time. A lot of us didn't. But so that being said, it hit me at the right time, I think, over here. And it was everywhere. You couldn't escape it. If you were into Pokemon at the time, it was almost inevitable that you were going to get some cards, right? That you were going to watch the show, you were going to play the games, you were going to get Pokemon merchandise, you were going to see those movies. It was everywhere. It was a thing. And a lot of adults at the time thought it was going to be a fad, but I think we can all agree that that's not the case. It's 20 plus years later. Pokemon is still making billions. That's right, with a B. Dollars. It's insane. Like, there are segments of the Pokemon franchise as a whole. Like, segments, individual segments that have made billions of dollars. Take Pokemon Go, for instance. That has made several $1 billion at this point. But we're not talking about that in this particular video, right? Although, I did make a video about that recently, and I'll leave a link to that in the description along with other Pokemon videos. Shameless plugs are shameless. But but yeah, so I grew up in a time where it was big, so I definitely played them. And when I say I played the game, I played it, but like a lot of people at the time, I didn't know the rules. At least back then, But speaking of those rules, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the basics. So the idea is it's a two-player game, right? You have one-on-one battles like with your cards. And how do those battles start? They start with a coin toss or a dice roll. If you're using coins, you can pick heads or tails. Someone calls it, someone flips it. And whoever wins, they get to decide who goes first or second. And if you're using a dice, you can use even numbers or odd numbers, right? Instead of heads and tails. And with that in mind, it might be really tempting to say if you win the toss that you can that you'll pick first, right? There was a better way to say that. So it can be tempting to go first if you have that option, but it's important to note that you cannot traditionally attack first during that first turn, right? You can't attack first unless you have a card that says otherwise. So you want to be careful as far as the situation is concerned. But getting into just starting the game, there's already math in the chance that someone is going to go first, right? There's math in that. But then going forward, each player then will pick up 7 cards, playing one of them. And the idea is like if you're first, the game will start with you picking a basic Pokemon to start the game. It has to be a basic Pokemon. And what do I mean? So it can't be an evolution. And that evolution thing, it's like whether it's a stage 1 or mid evolution or a stage 2, aka final evolution. Sorry, my eye is getting to me. It's been a long day, month, year, life. But in any case, so you draw your cards, you start the game, And the idea is you go back and forth, um, and there are different cards within the game. You have your Pokemon cards, you have your trainer cards, and those can be categorized differently depending on which year you're in. But the idea is like effectively they're different item cards that have different effects, right? Like maybe they heal your Pokemon, or maybe you get more support for your Pokemon. Maybe they allow you to draw again, or something like that. It depends on the situation. It depends on the card. So you have like these sort of things, and you have the energy cards, which allow you to attack or they allow you to retreat. And they also allow you to evolve your Pokemon. With that in mind, so each opponent has their active Pokemon with five bench Pokemon, and you're going back and forth using different cards, i.e., energy or items, etc. And you have to have a bunch of strategy in there. There's a lot of math that goes into it, right? Because like each Pokemon has their health, each Pokemon has the amount of damage they can dish out, and there's also resistances and weaknesses to consider that are based on type. But the cards do a good job of outlining that. And each card like had a bunch of numbers on them, like to tell you things like the health, to tell you things like the damage that you could do. They also have parts at the bottom that let you know if a card is common or rare or ultra rare, etc. And like we get different shapes over here in the states and in Japan, and they get letters. Not sure about other places, but if you're from another country and you're getting different things to indicate rarity, please feel free to share. But whether you're using um, the letter or the shapes, there's math in that. There's math in the placement. There's math in how big it is. There's math in the shapes. There's math in the degree of rarity it represents. There's math in all of that. So yeah, just like basically playing the game and how the cards are designed. There's math in all of it. And then there are video games, and I mean this, multiple video games that are about the trading card games, and they have their rules, they have their limits, and there's math in those in translating those rules. There's math in the amount of cards that are going to be in each game. There's math in how those games are designed. There's math in the music that are in those games. There's math all over the place with this, right? And so that's not the only thing though, right? There are tournaments to consider, and that's really cool, right? And I've heard that like people can win money from these, which is like insane. I don't know how much, but it's pretty cool. And these days, there are different leagues out there, and that's cool. Like, so you can have someone who is a league leader or a league owner, and you can have people compete over the year and keeping track of everything. And there's so much math that goes into designing that, right? There's so much math that goes into regulating that and figuring out your opponent and coming up with potentially different rules for the tournament and testing out new types of packs. There's math in all of that and how it flows and how it functions, and I think that's pretty cool. And you can win different things from it, like you can win different cards, and in some cases maybe you're winning something financially. Oh, and here's something to consider: um, if you're 18 or over, you could become um, a Pokemon professor for the league. So you might want to look into that. That being said, it's really cool how all this stuff works and how it all comes together. And in a lot of places, they divide the leagues by age. So you might have like your junior, senior, and master, where you might have like you might have like kids in the junior part, and like for the senior part maybe because I forget the exact age ranges, but like preteens and teens, um, and then like pretty much adults or really late teens for the master part. Um, but my point is, they're broken down that way, right? And age in general, um, you know, it's a mathematical concept. It has context. There are reasons why people do these things, and I think that's interesting. And for here, I gotta imagine a lot of it's about safety, and some of it they might be thinking about mental capacity. But I would hope that a lot of it's dealing with safety. Um, But yeah, so I think that's all interesting, and I think there's math in all of it, and hopefully you're seeing that so far. Now let's get into the crazy part, because speaking of safety, there's been a lot of unsafe things in this last year regarding this game, the Pokemon trading card game as a whole. So I want to talk about that and like collecting cards. So it's an interesting thing, right? I remember growing up, and either my parents would get me cards, or I would use an allowance to buy cards. But really, that's still pretty much my parents getting the cards. But it does give you some more agency, so it's a cool thing to consider, because you're like, hey, here's my allowance, right? I get a limited amount of money. What am I gonna spend it on? And so if you spend it on Pokemon cards, you want to figure out how much you'll get out of that, right? So you can get an individual pack where you're going to get like 10 cards, at least in the States. I don't know about other places, but you'll get 10 cards, right? Five of those are going to be Pokemon. The other ones are going to be different cards of varying rarity. One of them is going to be like a holographic. You could even get a promo code in there, or but so you could get an individual pack. You could get a deck that's already constructed. You could get some promo packs, or booster packs, and you could also get booster boxes where you can get like 36 packs in them. And so you got to decide how many Pokemon cards you want to get. Now, that was the kind of thing that you're thinking about, like as a kid, allowance wise, but as an adult, um, you're giving yourself your own allowance, and there's a lot of factors that come with that too. Because like when you're a kid, it might just be, oh, maybe I'm picking different interests depending on your personal situation, right? Things may vary. You might not have that luxury, or you might not get an allowance at all. But if you get one, you might have your personal interest in mind, right? I don't think that's too uncommon, but just saying, it's not a one size fits all sort of deal. But as an adult, it gets complicated. Like you could argue that it could be complicated as a kid, but I think like more so as an adult. Because the good news is yes, you have more disposable income. But it's like, what do you spend it on? What do you want to spend it on? And one of the weirdest but really interesting things to happen in this last year is that Pokemon cards have been um, raising up in value. They made a big comeback. It's the kind of thing that when we were collecting these cards and years ago, it's the kind of thing that people talked about, right? Because I grew up largely in the 90s. I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s for the most part. And as a result, it wasn't uncommon to see people collecting things because they were interested in them, but also having this idea that, oh, well, maybe one day these could be worth something, right? And there's math and all that, of course, and there's strategy in collecting and what you want to do. For me, oh, I played. I played. I didn't know what I was doing back then, but I played the cards, right? I read my comics and all that good stuff too, because right, you were collecting cards. They could be Pokemon cards, could be Digimon cards. Eventually, Yu-Gi-Oh cards down the line, baseball cards, basketball cards. There was a lot of different options. Comic books, and for a lot of people, you enjoyed your activities for the most part, and sometimes even as a kid, you find yourself having to justify why you enjoy the thing. So a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, this will be rare one day." Now, in some cases, that is the case, but it's also worth noting that these cards are like some of the ones that we had growing up. They're rare today, partially because yeah, they're hard to come by, but also it's because Pokemon is still a powerhouse. If Pokemon wasn't a powerhouse, then a lot of people probably wouldn't care about these cards. But that's not the only thing, right? We're in the middle of crazy times. A lot of people were home in 2020, and you had a lot of people who were influencers that got involved in this as well, right? Like you had a lot of people who were making videos about Pokemon, and well, I mean, there's a lot of people who do that anyway, but you had a lot of people that were making stuff that were specifically about the Pokemon trading card game, right? And so you get people getting more interested in that. Either you get older people who are feeling nostalgic about it, like myself. Yeah, I'm older. Um, or you maybe get some young people who aren't too familiar with the game. But for what it's worth, there are a lot of people who might have just been interested in that material who were like younger that play the game because it hasn't gone anywhere. And I think that's worth stating, right? Pokemon has staying power. And I think like over 20 years of being around, they've earned that title, or they've earned that description, right? Because we're on year 25 for Pokemon. That's insane. It's been around for most of my life. I'm 34, for context, and that's wild to me. So with that in mind, things got really crazy this year. You had Pokemon cards make a resurgence, and that still has dipped into this year. So I feel like you kind of had a perfect storm, and you had people collecting them more and more, and you had card shortages, partially because people were buying them like crazy, but also, a lot of things are harder to come by these days. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was an active factor in that. But it gets more insane than that because, some stores for a period of time had to stop carrying them. Now, some of them is because, well, yeah, people ran out. But in some cases, it's because violence was ensuing because people were doing whatever they could to get the cards. People were fighting each other. It's insanity. Um, and I think that's fascinating because, like, right, if you're buying a lot of cards now, you could be thinking, oh, maybe they'll be, um, you know, valuable down the line. And maybe you're going to be right, but it's not worth fighting someone over. I can't stress that enough. With that in mind, with these cards like having a lot of value, not an exaggeration, there are some cards that have been sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's wild to me. And I don't think it's a shock that some of the ones that are really getting really crazy up there, or like rare Charizard cards. Oh no 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 no! My video froze for a second. Doing that again. Arg. Um, I don't like that. um, but Charizard cards have always been popular, especially holographic Charizard cards. So it's not a shock to me to see something like a very specific type of first edition holographic Charizard card be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like I've seen things where $350,000, and some getting close to like 400,000. It's wild. But just to be clear, though, these aren't just regular cards, right? Like they're rare, sure, but these are cards that also had to be certified. They had to be graded, and you're gonna have to put up some cash to get it graded to get that certification. Right. And I think one of the things is if you are a collector or if you want to start collecting Pokemon cards, you have to be exceedingly careful. There's a lot of fake stuff out there. A lot of people trying to capitalize on these cards. But one of the interesting things about this is that so all of the talk with the trading cards, all the insanity, it does make it hard for people who just generally want to collect. And I think that's interesting and unfortunate. And just like with this whole process, right? There's just to me, it's interesting just to watch it unfold because I grew up on Pokemon and I grew up playing this game among the video games and watching the anime and all that stuff. But it's also interesting because there's a lot of math and how this all functions and flows. And we're looking at these different cards and attributing this value to them or that value to them, and it's wild. Um, and numbers have context. It matters. They matter. Also, one of the things I wanted to mention, um, I I thought of like well no I saw something earlier about a first edition like jungle booster set going for like $1.2 million, like unopened, graded, all that good stuff, which is insane. $1.2 million. And I I'm pretty sure like the shipping was like $30, and it's just like really, really charging shipping on that. I mean, I get it, but it's just like if I had someone and they just bid a bunch of money, I'd probably waive the shipping if I was going to give them like the set and get million like over $1 million for it. But if they got money to spend like that, they're probably okay with the shipping fee. But just saying, right? There's money in how all this works and how it functions. And if you're someone who's buying the cards, you have to be selective because whether you're a kid with an allowance or an adult with a job, you have to make a decision on whether you can buy Pokemon cards, and if you can, whether that's good. And if it's good, why is it good? There's several reasons to it. Like if you feel like you want to have them because you enjoy the game, then I do think that's enough if you can afford it. If you think it's going to be an investment, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. We're seeing some craziness down, but it's like it's also a very specific time. It's not the most unsafe investment, but at the same time, probably not the safest. So you have to weigh your options and what you want to do. And I think it's also worth noting that if you are saving up the cards so you can like sell them in the future, you're going to want to protect them and you're going to want to get them graded at some point before selling them in the future. But that being said, I hope that there are people who just want to play the game. But whatever your passion is, whatever you're going for, I hope this video has been interesting for you. I hope you learned something. I hope you think about the cards a little differently and math in general too. And please feel free to add to the conversation. Because I know there's a lot of you who, like, no doubt, have more knowledge about the Pokemon trading card game than I do. And if you're someone who's interested in playing it and you haven't really played it before, I am going to leave a link to the Pokemon website, specifically their page on the Pokemon trading card game, but also a link to how to play it too. And I'll kind of go from there if I find more interesting links down the line. That being said, I'll see you in the next video. Professor Prime out.